Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about defense mechanisms, how they happen, what they are, some examples, who came up with them, and all of that good stuff. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and present my screen. Awesome, possum. All right, so defense mechanisms. Now, defense mechanisms there are different ones, of course. We're going to be talking about all of these. I don't want to go through the whole list because I'm about to talk about each one of them. But these were developed by Sigmund Freud, and they were later emphasized by his daughter, Anna Freud. Now, this is where I'm getting all of my information from, The Theory and Practice of Counseling and Psychotherapy by Gerald Corey. These defense mechanisms are unconscious psychological strategies that we use to deal with our stress, deal with our anxiety, and protect our self-esteem. They help us manage our stress, internal conflicts, and threatening situations, as well as protect our ego. They can be adaptive, as in they're helpful for us, or they can be maladaptive, depending on the context and the frequency of use. Now, I find that these come out a lot with couples and when they're arguing. So I would also challenge you to, while I'm talking about these, try to see if you use any of these defense mechanisms. These are not only helpful to know for psychology students and future mental health professionals, they're also helpful for us to know just in terms of our own behavior so we can identify it and see if there's anything that we need to change or may be maladaptive and not helping us. So starting with the first one, this is the foundation of defenses, and it is repression. Now, repression is something that you do not necessarily try to repress. You don't necessarily try to forget. Your brain just kind of does it to protect you from that hurt or pain. So take, for example, I don't know if you guys have seen the show Moon Knight or Night, something like that. He doesn't remember that his mom was abusive and mean to him his whole childhood. He remembers his mother as being loving and kind, even though she was psychologically abusing that child for the longest time and blaming his brother's death on him and taking that out on him, also known as displacement, which we'll talk about in a bit. But that's one of the ways that you can remember it. I would always recommend whenever you're studying anything to try to connect it to either a show, a person, something that you've experienced, because it'll help you come up with mnemonic devices that will help you remember. So going on. This is excluding threatening or painful thoughts and feelings from conscious awareness. So this is one of the most important Freudian processes, and it forms the basis of other defense mechanisms or neurotic disorders. This is the involuntary removal of this distressing content from your consciousness. Often involves burying painful memories from your childhood. First 5 to 6 years of life. And then these threatened events can still influence your later behavior, and you might not be aware of it because you don't remember the event. So some examples, and it doesn't just happen in childhood, right? So a person who can't remember details of a traumatic car accident that they experience, or an adult who has no recollection of childhood abuse despite evidence that it occurred. And lastly, a student who blanks out during an exam, unable to recall information that they studied. So as you can see, they range in terms of stress and severity of the event. And just because it's not something as serious as childhood abuse doesn't mean that you can't have it happen like during a test. All right, denial. Now, this one is similar to repression, but the difference is with repression, you are not consciously trying to forget. And with denial, you are straight up denying that it happened and you're consciously trying to forget. So it's closing your eyes to reality. And it's the simplest of all defense mechanisms. It distorts our thoughts, our feelings, our perceptions in traumatic situations, and operates at a preconscious and a conscious level. Now, preconscious levels, what that means is they're things that are available to you, but you have to think about them. So let's say I ask you, like, what did you do for your birthday last year? You might not remember right away, but I'm sure if you dig through your brain, you'll be able to recall what happened because that's in your preconscious area of your brain versus unconscious or subconscious. You don't know about it really until we do some work and are able to get in there. So this is similar to repression, but it's more accessible to your awareness. Some examples. A person with an alcohol problem saying they can stop anytime, despite having clear signs of addictions. A student refusing to accept a failing grade, claiming that the professor must have made a mistake. Or a parent ignoring their child's learning disability, insisting that they're just a late bloomer. So again, all of these can be either adaptive, helpful, or maladaptive, not helpful. Now, reaction formation, embracing the opposite. Reaction formation is what happens when you're confronted with a threatening desire and you do the opposite than your impulse. So let's say somebody, for example, is holding a gun to your head and you might really want to just like attack that person and not let them shoot you, but you can't because you are doing the opposite. You're just standing still and experiencing it. This develops conscious attitudes and behaviors opposite to the distributing desires. It helps avoid anxiety associated with recognizing unacceptable aspects of yourself, and it helps manifest as exaggerated behaviors in the opposite direction. So some examples. I think examples are one of the best ways to learn BT dubs. Okay, a person with a crush on a coworker, acting overly critical or hostile towards them. An individual raised in a strict religious household become excessively promiscuous in adulthood. A parent who feels guilty about working long hours becoming overly permissive with their child. So basically, it's doing the opposite of what you would want to do. Like, for example, the crush. You want to tell them how you feel and that you like them, but instead you react differently. And that's how I remember it. The reaction to something is the opposite. Okay, then we have projection. So unwanted traits onto others. So this is attributing one's own unacceptable desires and impulses to others. Some characteristics of it are a mechanism of self-deception, and it allows individuals to distance themselves from negative traits or impulses. And it often involves seeing one's own faults in others. So not that this is a fault at all, but one of the ways that I remember this is take, for example, some displacement examples. First, a teenager yelling at their younger siblings after being scolded by their parents. An employee who feels undervalued at work becoming overly critical of their spouse at home. Or a person kicking a trash can after receiving bad news that they can't directly address. And that is displacement. Now let's look at rationalization. So this is justifying behaviors. This is manufacturing good reasons to explain away a bruised ego. So this helps justify specific behaviors. It aids in softening the blow with disappointments, allows for individuals to maintain their self-esteem in the face of failure or rejection. So some examples are after not getting a job, a person convinces themselves that they didn't really want it anyway, and they find logical reasons for their rejection. Or a student justifying procrastination by claiming that they work better under pressure. An individual explaining their expensive purchases as an investment despite financial struggles, or a job applicant convincing themselves that a position wasn't a good fit after being rejected. Now, there's two types. There's the sour grapes, and then there's the sweet lemon, right? So sour grapes is when you're experiencing something good, or give me a second, trying to rationalize something good that you don't have. And the sweet lemon is trying to find the good in something that you do have. I hope I explained that well. Okay. Then we have sublimation, or channeling your energy. Now, this one is diverting sexual or aggressive energy into others, often socially acceptable channels. So, some characteristics. This is considered one of the most adaptive defense mechanisms. It's often praised. Allows for the expression of impulses in praiseworthy ways, and it often results in positive social recognition. So, let's say you're a very aggressive person. Instead of going and beating up people, you go and join a football team. So you have some way to channel your aggression that's positive. Or if you're a person who really enjoys controlling other people, instead of controlling everyone around you in a negative way, you become a boss at a firm and you can control everything in that firm in a positive way. Some more examples are anger issues, taking up boxing or martial arts, a person channeling their sexual energy into creating passionate works of art, or someone with a troubled past becoming a social worker to help others with similar situations. And that's sublimation. So you're substituting a behavior with another. That's how I think about it. Then we have regression. So regression is reverting back to earlier behaviors. This is returning to earlier phases of development with fewer demands. This often occurs in response to severe stress or extreme challenges. It involves clinging to immature and inappropriate behaviors and can cause temporary or persistent distress. Now, I like to think about this. It's not as regressive as you may think. Say, for example, when I get into an argument with my significant other, I tend to throw temper tantrums like a child. And that is me regressing to an earlier form of behavior. That's how I remember it. Another one could be an adult sucking their thumb or cuddling a stuffed animal when they're extremely upset. A college student calling their parents daily for advice on basic tasks when they're stressed about exams, or an usually articulate person reverting to childish language or tantrums during an argument, aka me. Okay, let's continue. We have introjection. So this is internalizing external values. I remember internalizing and introjection both start with an I. This is taking in and swallowing the behaviors, the values, and standards of others. There's positive kinds, which are incorporating beneficial parental values or therapist attributes. Like sometimes if you're taught coping mechanisms or ways to calm down in a session, you start integrating those into your daily life. That's a positive introjection. But there's also negative ones, like critically accepting harmful behaviors, identification with the aggressor, like taking your parents' stances on racism or something that are negative and just accepting them blindly. Some examples, a child adopting their parents' political views without question, a new employee mimicking their boss's management style even outside of work, a person in therapy session begins to use a therapist's phrases and problem-solving approaches. That's the introduction. Then we have identification. So identification is you trying to align yourself with success. The identifying with successful causes, organizations, or people to enhance your self-worth can protect you against feelings of failure or inadequacy, part of the developmental process for learning gender roles and behaviors, and it can be adaptive when it leads to personal growth. But not always, because then you start to value yourself as that person's, let's say, assistant instead of your own person. So, for example, a sports fan feeling personal victory when their team wins. A person extensively evaluating a celebrity's style, speech, and mannerisms, or a student taking on the same career path as their admired older sibling. So you identify with these people. Say, for example, if I introduce myself and I say, I'm friends with Taylor Swift, and that's the way I identify myself. That's identification, because I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about someone else. Okay, then we have compensation. So this one's pretty simple to understand. overcoming perceived weaknesses. This is mass perceived weaknesses or developing positive traits to make up for those limitations. They can have direct adjustment value, attempts to redirect attention from perceived inferiorities to accomplishments, and they may lead to development of valuable skills or attributes. Some examples: a student with poor math skills putting extra effort into excelling into literature, an employee with limited technical skills developing exceptional interpersonal skills, or a person with a physical disability becoming an advocate and leader for accessibility rights. So all of these are, you're compensating for one thing that you don't feel that you're great at by being perfect at another. Now, it's important to recognize defense mechanisms in ourselves. Here are some ways that we can do it. Through some self-reflection questions like, do I often find myself justifying my actions or decisions? How do I typically react when faced with criticism or failure? Are there patterns in how I handle stress or conflict? And benefits of self-awareness include improved emotional regulation, better problem-solving skills, and enhanced personal growth and relationships. So knowing your defense mechanisms, knowing that they're a part of our human behavior, they can be adaptive or maladaptive, and they can lead to increased empathy for others, improved self-understanding, and more effective communication and conflict resolution.